Enzo Ferrari, the man who built cars only to fund his racing. There's a car brand whose logo, a rearing horse, is recognized by literally every person on the planet, whether they care about cars or not. But few people know that the man who created this brand never actually wanted to build cars for ordinary customers. He said it plainly, "I build engines and attach wheels to them." And he only sold road cars to fund his real passion, racing. This is Enzo Ferrari, the man who, at 65, nearly sold his entire company to Ford, and whose last-minute refusal to go through with that deal sparked one of the most famous rivalries in the history of motorsport. Today we're covering his complete story, from losing his father and brother as a young man to building one of the most recognizable luxury brands in the world. Childhood and losing his family. Enzo Ferrari was born on February 18, 1898, in Modena, Italy, into a family working in metalworking. There's an interesting detail few people know. Because a heavy snowstorm delayed his father's trip to the registry office, his official birth date on record is February 20th, 2 days later than his actual birth. At age 10, his father took him and his older brother to their first car race, near Bologna, and it was at that moment, by his own later account, that the obsession with speed was born, one that would define the rest of his life. But Ferrari's childhood turned tragic. During World War I, when Enzo was around 18 to 20 years old, he lost both his father and his older brother in close succession, a devastating blow that forced him to start earning his own living early. We've covered the tragic start of his story, but the next chapter shows that even his path into the automotive world began not with a triumph, but with a rejection. Rejected by Fiat and the start of a racing career. After being discharged from the Italian army in 1919, Ferrari, desperate for work, went to Turin with one specific goal: to get a job at the Fiat factory. He was turned down. That rejection, which today looks like one of the most ironic details in the history of the auto industry, pushed him instead into a job as a mechanic, and then, through a chance connection, into a position as a test driver at a small company called Costruzioni Meccaniche Nazionale. That same year, 1919, he made his debut in his first official race, the Parma to Poggio di Berceto Hilcum, finishing fourth in his class. Just a year later, in 1920, the talent of the young driver caught the attention of Alfa Romeo, and Ferrari became one of their drivers, a partnership that would last the next 20 years and shape the rest of his career. We've covered how a rejected Fiat mechanic became an Alfa Romeo driver. But it's during these years that a symbol entered his life that the entire world knows today: the origin of the prancing horse logo. In 1923, after Ferrari won the Coppa Servo race, he met the parents of Francesco Baracca, the legendary Italian World War the first flying ace, whose plane had been decorated with an image of a rearing black horse. The parents of the fallen hero suggested the young driver use the symbol on his cars for good luck. That rearing horse, set against a yellow background, yellow representing Ferrari's home city of Modena, became the legendary emblem recognized today in literally every corner of the world, whether or not someone knows anything about cars at all. We've covered the origin of that iconic logo. But the next stage of his life began not with a personal triumph behind the wheel, but with a decision that would define his entire future role in motorsport: the birth of Scuderia Ferrari. In 1929, while still racing as an Alfa Romeo driver, Ferrari founded a team called Scuderia Ferrari in his hometown of Modena, essentially a racing stable that prepared and serviced Alfa Romeo cars for private drivers. He handpicked the best drivers of his era for the team and poached skilled mechanics away from competitors, including that same Fiat that had once turned him down for a job. The birth of his son Alfredo, known within the family as Dino, in 1932, became one of the reasons Ferrari decided to finally end his own driving career and focus entirely on managing the team. By 1933, when Alfa Romeo itself temporarily withdrew from direct racing involvement due to financial troubles, Ferrari had effectively taken over management of the company's entire racing program. We've covered how Ferrari the driver became Ferrari the team manager. But the next chapter of his career, the split with Alfa Romeo, laid the groundwork for what would eventually become a brand carrying his own name. The split with Alfa Romeo and the birth of his own company. In 1939, Ferrari's relationship with Alfa Romeo finally broke down over disagreements about the direction of the company's racing division. Ferrari felt management wasn't taking racing seriously enough and wanted to strike out on his own. The terms of his departure from Alfa Romeo included a clause explicitly barring him from using his own name in a new company for the next 4 years. So his first independent firm had to be called Automotive instead. To keep the business afloat during wartime, the company manufactured aircraft parts and machine tools for the Italian government. The only car ever produced under that name, the AC-815, built in 1940 for the Brescia Grand Prix, was built in just 2 units on a Fiat chassis and became the first car ever engineered entirely under Ferrari's own direct leadership. We've covered how a forced compromise over a company name produced Ferrari's first truly independent car. But a full brand carrying his own name on the hood wouldn't appear until years later, after the war. The birth of Ferrari as a brand. After World War II ended, demand for aircraft parts collapsed, and Ferrari shifted his company's full attention to building cars. In 1947, at age 49, he officially founded Ferrari SPA, fully merging Auto Avio Costruzioni into the new brand. That same year, the first car ever to officially carry the Ferrari name rolled out of the factory in Maranello. The 125S, powered by a 1.5-liter V12 engine. Ferrari treated building road cars purely as a way to fund his real passion, motorsport. A famous quote often attributed to him puts it plainly: "I build engines and attach wheels to them." And in the company's earliest days, he reportedly dismissed aerodynamics entirely as something for people who can't build engines. We've covered the birth of the brand itself. The following decade would bring the company and its founder worldwide fame on the racetrack, but not without a personal tragedy that shaped how Ferrari felt about his own victories. Track triumphs and personal drama. On July 14, 1951, during the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, a Ferrari car beat his former employer Alfa Romeo for the first time, a turning point for the young brand's reputation as a serious competitor on the world racing stage. But Ferrari himself reacted to that victory with surprising conflict, later saying the now famous line, "I feel like I've killed my own mother," a metaphor reflecting his complicated, almost sentimental feelings toward the company that had first given him a start. The 1950s and 60s brought the team dozens of championship titles, and models like the 250 GTO and the 275 GTB cemented Ferrari's reputation as a maker of some of the most desirable sports cars in the world, blending racing technology with elegant design. We've covered the company's sporting triumphs, but it was during this same period that an event took place that became one of the most famous rivalries in the entire history of the auto industry. The Ford deal that never happened. In 1963, facing financial difficulties, Ferrari offered Ford the chance to buy his entire business, asking roughly $18 million for the company. Negotiations went far enough that Ford's lawyers were already preparing the paperwork to finalize the deal, but at the very last stage of negotiations, Ferrari suddenly walked away, realizing he'd lose complete control of his racing division if the deal went through, since Ford insisted on controlling every decision related to racing, including the famous Le Mans race. This abrupt last-minute refusal so enraged Ford's chief, Henry Ford II, that he decided to launch his own, fully independent European sports car racing program, with the single goal of beating Ferrari on the track, whatever it took. That's how the legendary Ford versus Ferrari rivalry at the 24 Hours of Le Mans was born, a story that decades later inspired the Hollywood film Ford v Ferrari. Although Ford ultimately won on the track, Ferrari's refusal of a multi-million-dollar deal only strengthened his reputation as an unyielding Italian craftsman who refused to bow to an American corporation's demands. We've covered one of the most famous rivalries in motorsport history. But the company's financial troubles didn't disappear, and Ferrari eventually had to compromise anyway, just not with the company that had made the original offer. The deal with Fiat. Despite walking away from the Ford deal, the company's financial problems kept mounting through the 1960s, and Ferrari eventually agreed to a partial sale of the business, this time to the Italian company Fiat, the very same company that had once turned him down for a mechanic's job. In 1965, Fiat acquired a small stake in the company, and by 1969, that stake had grown to 50%. A key condition of this deal, important for understanding Ferrari's character. Despite selling half the company, he retained complete, sole control over the Scuderia Ferrari racing division, the part of the business that had always mattered more to him than building road cars. Ferrari himself remained managing director of the company until 1971 and kept significant influence over the firm's affairs right up until his death, even after formally stepping down as president in 1977. We've covered the financial agreement with Fiat, but Ferrari's story also includes a deeply personal tragedy that shaped his final decades. Personal loss in the final years. Ferrari's son, Alfredo, known within the family as Dino, suffered from muscular dystrophy and passed away in 1956 at just 24 years old, a tragedy that, according to those close to him, left a deep, lasting wound on Ferrari for decades to come. An entire line of the company's cars was later named in his honor, the Dino-branded models produced through the 1960s and 70s. Ferrari passed away on August 14, 1988, at 90 years old, in his hometown of Modena, just months before the debut of the Ferrari F40, a car that became, in many ways, a tribute to his memory and legacy. By that point, his company had firmly established itself as one of the most recognizable and desirable car brands on the planet. Conclusion. Enzo Ferrari's story is the story of a man who was rejected by Fiat, who lost his father and brother as a young man, and later lost his own son as an adult, and who nonetheless built a brand that became synonymous with speed, luxury, and Italian engineering craftsmanship. He never really saw himself primarily as a businessman. His entire philosophy came down to one simple idea. Road cars exist only to fund the real passion, racing. That's exactly why, even after selling half the company to Fiat under financial pressure, he held on to personal control of the racing division until his last day. The part of the business that, in his own words, was the whole reason he ever got into cars in the first place. Today, Ferrari sells more than 13,000 cars a year and remains one of the most recognizable and prestigious car brands in the world, nearly 100 years after the founding of Scuderia Ferrari in 1929. If this was useful, subscribe. Next up, we'll go much deeper into the Ford versus Ferrari rivalry, along with the stories of other legendary brands the whole world knows. This channel is for educational purposes only. We share research and biographical information, not financial advice. We are not responsible for any decisions made based on this content.